You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this underlying expectation of precision.
Right, like it's a hard science.
Exactly. It feels almost akin to engineering. You fall off a bike, you break your arm, the X-ray shows that jagged white line on the screen, and the doctor just points at it and says, there it is.
Yeah, it's binary. It's clean. It's either broken or it's not broken.
Right. And that binary nature is inherently comforting. We desperately want things to be visible and neatly categorized, especially when we're trying to figure out what's wrong.
Oh, absolutely. But the moment you step out of a hospital and, into the world of trying to diagnose the health of a society or trying to uncover the hidden architectures of power and wealth, that X-ray machine is just completely useless.
Yeah, it's gone.
The diagnostic landscape we're navigating today is the absolute definition of murky. You don't get a clean white line showing where democracy fractured or, where a financial system is bleeding.
You really don't. Because when you're looking at global power structures or staggering wealth disparity, the fractures aren't just sitting there in plain sight waiting to be photographed.
No, they are actively obscured. I mean, they're buried behind layers of offshore shell companies.
Tangled in unstandardized civic data.
Exactly. And locked away inside these heavily guarded digital walled gardens that are literally designed to keep you out.
Which honestly sets the stage perfectly for what we're doing on this deep dive today. We are taking you on a journey that starts 30,000 feet in the air.
A very high altitude.
Yeah, examining the sweeping, highly provocative narrative about the ultimate architecture of power and control in our modern world. And then we're going to drop all the way down to the granular bedrock.
Right down to the code.
Exactly. We're going to look at the actual tools, the open source intelligence, the machine learning models, the Python code that data journalists use to pierce through that murkiness and figure out what is actually happening in reality.
But before we dive into the mechanics of, how investigative journalists track power, we really have to examine the specific theory of power that we've been handed in our source material today.
Yes.
And there is something we need to make explicitly, unequivocally clear right up front.
Yes, this is crucial for you, the listener, to know as we begin. The primary source material we are starting with contains highly politically charged content.
Very charged.
It involves explicit mentions of left-wing and right-wing figures, Donald Trump, LGBTQ rights, abortion access. We must clearly inform you that we are not taking sides.
Absolutely not.
And we are not endorsing the viewpoints of the content.
Right. Our sole objective here is to impartially report and unpack the ideas contained in the original source material.
Just laying it out.
Yeah. We are treating this text as an artifact for your intellectual exploration. We need to look at the anatomy of this narrative to understand the massive claims it makes about societal control so that we can then understand why robust data-driven tools are just so vital in testing these kinds of claims.
So let's open up this first document. The author of this text presents this chilling, comprehensive blueprint for what they describe as a modern feudalism.
Feudalism, yeah.
The core claim is that a very small, very specific group of ultra-wealthy white men. The text singles out financiers, tech billionaires, global businessmen are actively and intentionally dismantling democratic systems.
And the source uses a really provocative label for this group, right? It refers to them as the Epstein class.
Yeah, which is a heavy term.
Extremely heavy. That term is deliberately chosen to evoke this sense of unchecked, untouchable elite privilege that operates completely outside the bounds of normal human morality or law.
Right.
And the text claims this class operates under a terrifying psychological delusion. They actually believe they are, quote, touched by God to be the chosen ones.
Wow, touched by God.
Yeah. They've essentially surveyed the landscape of modern democracy and decided it simply isn't working for them anymore, primarily because democracy, by design, distributes power and resources too broadly.
So if democracy distributes power too broadly, their solution, according to this narrative, is to just eradicate the middle class entirely.
Just wipe it out.
Yeah. The ultimate goal outlined here is the creation of a rigid two-class society. You have the kings and the lords at the very top, and everyone else is violently compressed into a singular underclass of serfs and workers.
No middle ground at all.
None. There is no upper middle class buffer, no lower middle class mobility. It is just extreme hoarding of wealth on one end and absolute grinding poverty on the other.
What makes this document so fascinating as an artifact is that it doesn't just present this as some, vague dystopian wish list. It actually outlines a highly specific, multi-step blueprint that it claims is being executed concurrently right now across the globe.
Okay, so let's break down the mechanics of this alleged plan. The first step is what the author brutally describes as eliminating the useless.
We have to pause on how chilling that word is.
Useless.
So clinical. Right. In the eyes of this elite class, usefulness is defined entirely by whether or not you actively serve their economic or social interests.
So if you aren't producing for them.
Exactly.
Right.
The text claims this involves a coordinated effort to cut all aid to seniors, the sick, and the disabled. It specifically highlights cutting aid to children with disabilities.
Oh, wow.
It's dark, and it also extends to marginalized groups. The source explicitly mentions a campaign to cut all aids and services to the LGBTQ community and to relentlessly attack the nonprofits that serve these demographics.
So they're going after the support systems.
Yeah, if you look at the underlying logic of this step, it's a brutal utilitarianism. If a population doesn't directly serve the elite as a laborer or a compliant consumer, any societal resources spent sustaining them are considered a gross inefficiency.
It's viewing human life purely through the lens of, like, supply chain optimization.
Exactly. It's treating society like a corporate balance sheet, where vulnerable people are just marked as dead weight.
But to successfully strip away those safety nets, I mean, you can't have watchdogs barking at the door.
Right. They'd stop you.
Which brings us to the second step of the blueprint, which is dismantling protections. The text alleges a coordinated, systemic effort to strip away every single institution that might protect these non-wealthy classes from exploitation.
And the mechanics of this are laid out really clearly. You systematically delegitimize and defund the press.
Right.
You neuter the legislative power of Congress. You pack or bypass the courts, and you bankrupt advocacy groups.
Basically tearing down the walls.
In biological terms, you are intentionally destroying the societal immune system. When the time comes to extract the remaining wealth and rights from the populace, there's no structural mechanism left for pushback.
The alarm bells have all been disconnected.
Exactly.
And then the blueprint moves into an area that is deeply disturbing. It details a highly structured plan for the subjugation of women.
Yeah, this part is very specific.
The source outlines a strictly defined role for women in this new feudal society. It claims that the elites have identified a worldwide shortage of new babies.
Right.
Because they will need a constant, endless supply of laborers, and it specifically states they want white and black men to serve them. Women must be structurally forced to reproduce.
And the steps outlined to achieve this subjugation are methodical and just chillingly sequential.
What are they?
First, ban abortion access entirely. Second, ban all forms of birth control. Third, actively push women out of the workplace and aggressively restrict their access to graduate schools and higher education.
So just completely closing off any other path.
Yeah. The ultimate goal, according to the text, is to confine women to the domestic sphere with a single mandated societal role, which is reproduction.
They're positioned not as citizens, but purely as the biological supply chain for future generations of serfs.
It completely strips away autonomy.
It really does. And speaking of stripping away autonomy, the blueprint also takes direct aim at how the next generation thinks, focusing heavily on the destruction of public education.
Right, controlling the narrative early.
Yeah, the theory states that these elites are actively blurring the lines between church and state. And the mechanism here is vital to understand. By blurring those lines, they can legally funnel public taxpayer money away from secular public schools and into wealthy, private, often religious institutions.
And by simultaneously launching relentless attacks on the validity and funding of public schools, you achieve a massive systemic victory for this alleged feudal system.
Because if you destroy public education...
Right. You ensure that the serf class never gains the critical thinking skills, the historical context, or the civic knowledge required to challenge the system. You're engineering a populace that is smart enough to pull the levers on the machines, but entirely unequipped to question who actually owns the factory.
Wow. Tying all these social and institutional attacks together is the economic squeeze. The text describes what is essentially a massive, coordinated pincer movement on the working class.
Yeah, squeeze from both sides.
You structurally lower wages for everyone at the bottom while simultaneously raising their taxes. Meanwhile, for the elite class, the exact opposite occurs.
Exponentially higher rewards.
Exactly. Massive deregulation and drastically lower taxes. It's a forced legislative wealth transfer upward, designed to cement generational power so completely that it can never be undone.
And this brings us to the final piece of the theoretical puzzle, which is the current political landscape.
Right.
The theory has a very specific explanation for the chaotic political environment we see today. It positions highly polarizing figures, explicitly naming Donald Trump, not as the ultimate masterminds of this grand design, but merely as the clown or the idiot in charge.
A distraction.
According to this narrative, his specific calculated purpose is to rile up the populace, dominate the news cycle with outrage, and provide a massive, deafening distraction.
While everyone is watching the circus, this radical, quiet restructuring of the global economic and social order occurs entirely in the background. I mean, I'm listening to all of this, and it sounds like a perfectly drafted dystopian corporate strategy memo.
It reads like one, yeah.
But hold on, let's really think about the execution of this. Human history is relentlessly messy. Elites are not a monolith.
No, they hate each other half the time.
Right. Tech billionaires absolutely despise Wall Street traditionalists. Global politicians have massive, fragile egos. They constantly compete, they backstab each other for market share, they leak information to destroy their rivals.
Exactly.
How on earth does a conspiracy of this scale, which requires flawless, uniform coordination across global finance, technology, and politics, maintain absolute secrecy?
It's the weakest link problem.
Someone would leave a laptop at a repair shop, or a disgruntled executive would leak the Slack channel. It requires a level of monolithic competence and unified silence that human beings, especially egotistical, powerful ones, just rarely achieve.
That is the essential, piercing question. The sheer friction of human ego usually prevents perfect conspiracies. And that is exactly why we cannot simply rely on grand, sweeping narratives, no matter how compelling or terrifying they might sound in a vacuum.
Right.
We don't have to just sit around and guess if democratic institutions are being systematically dismantled or if the ultra-wealthy are hoarding capital in secret shell companies. We have an entire, highly sophisticated discipline dedicated to stress testing these exact claims with empirical reality.
So if there really is a coordinated effort to hide wealth, dodge taxes, and create this two-class society, they are going to leave a paper trail.
Always.
If institutions are actually failing to protect vulnerable people, there will be measurable data proving it, which transitions us out of the realm of grand theory and right into the real-world trenches of data-driven investigative journalism.
So let's examine the organizations actively building the tools to map that paper trail. Our sources highlight the monumental work of groups like the ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and ProPublica.
These are the people building the societal X-ray machines.
Exactly.
The ICIJ is legendary for uncovering the offshore money maze. When we talk about that blueprint's claim of elites engineering higher rewards and lower taxes for themselves, the ICIJ's offshore leaks database, which includes massive leaks like the Panama Papers and the Pandora Papers, is the actual geographical map of how that wealth transfer is executed.
Right, it's not theoretical.
No, it shows the literal shell companies in the British Virgin Islands and the trusts in South Dakota.
And what's crucial to understand about the ICIJ's work is the real-world, localized consequences. The source material notes a specific, staggering outcome. Nordea Bank, which is a massive European financial institution, had to pay a $35 million fine to end a money laundering probe directly linked to the Panama Papers leak.
But the detail that blew my mind in the source was the timeline.
Oh yeah, the 10 years.
Danish authorities charged Nordea Bank with those money laundering violations a full 10 years after the initial ICIJ expose was published. 10 years.
It's incredible.
That is multiple political administrations, countless shifting news cycles, and probably a complete turnover of the original investigative team. It proves that when you anchor your investigation in hard data, the truth doesn't just evaporate when the news cycle moves on. Holding power accountable is a grueling marathon, not a sprint.
The data becomes an indelible historical record, and the strategy the ICIJ uses to process that data is brilliant. They know that a centralized team of reporters in Washington or London cannot possibly understand the localized context of millions of leaked documents.
It's just too much information.
So they crowdsource the investigation, they open their offshore leaks database to the public, they actively ask regular citizens, activists, and local journalists in every corner of the world to dig through the data.
That's so smart.
Right. A local citizen in a small municipality might instantly recognize the name of a corrupt mayor's brother-in-law attached to a Panamanian shell company, a connection that a Pulitzer-winning reporter in New York would completely scroll past.
It's the ultimate democratization of accountability. You are fighting the hoarding of power by distributing the investigation to the masses.
Exactly.
Now, if we pivot to ProPublica, we see a completely different but equally vital kind of investigation. If the new feudalism theory claims that protections for the sick and vulnerable are being intentionally dismantled, ProPublica's methodology shows us exactly how you measure institutional failure at the ground level.
ProPublica's investigation into HIPAA patient privacy violations is a masterclass in this. They wanted to know if the institutions designed to protect our most sensitive medical data were actually doing their jobs.
Right.
They didn't just go out and find one tragic anecdote about a patient whose records were leaked. Anecdotes can be dismissed as outliers.
Right.
Instead, they acquired and analyzed a massive data set of 13,200 individual complaints.
And this is where the romanticized idea of data journalism hits the brick wall of reality.
Oh, it gets so messy.
Those 13,200 complaints weren't handed to them on a clean, perfectly formatted spreadsheet. They had to pull this data from a fractured web of agencies: the Department of Health and Human Services, the VA, and the California Department of Public Health. And the reality, as the source points out, is that civic data is almost always filthy.
It is remarkably dirty.
Yeah.
And the manual labor required to clean it is staggering. The source explains that to find the worst repeat offenders, the hospitals or pharmacies that were systemically violating privacy, ProPublica had to standardize the data by hand.
By hand.
Yeah. Imagine staring at a spreadsheet for days, realizing that a privacy complaint logged against Walmart with a hyphen, another logged against Walgreens with a space, and a third logged as Walge, all refer to massive corporate entities, but the database treats them as completely separate minor infractions.
If a journalist doesn't catch that formatting error, if they don't manually consolidate those misspelled rows, the biggest corporate offender in the country looks like 100 different harmless mom-and-pop pharmacies.
Right. The truth of systemic failure is literally buried in bad formatting.
That hand cleaning of 13,200 records isn't just busy work. It is the fundamental, exhausting labor required to prevent institutions from hiding behind administrative incompetence.
But this raises a fascinating counterpoint to the conspiracy theory we started with.
Oh, yeah.
That blueprint explicitly claimed that the elites are successfully destroying the press to remove all watchdogs. Yet, the survival, the global collaboration, and the massive financial and legal impacts of groups like the ICIJ and ProPublica levying multi-million-dollar fines and exposing global networks strongly suggests that the immune system of democracy is actually still functioning, doesn't it?
It absolutely proves there is massive resistance. The press is not dead, but it has had to evolve into a highly technical apparatus.
It's evolved, yeah.
You can't just meet a source in a dark parking garage anymore. You need terabytes of data, you need cross-border legal teams, and most importantly, you need the ability to translate that massive pile of dirty data into a story the public can actually digest.
Which brings us perfectly to the raw materials of this new journalism.
Yeah.
Where are these investigators getting their data, and how are they translating it?
Right.
Our sources highlight platforms like 538 and The Pudding, which illustrate both the sheer volume of trackable human behavior and the complex art of data storytelling.
538 is such a perfect example of making the invisible mechanics of society visible. When you look at the data sets they make entirely open source on their GitHub repository, the variety is just staggering. It proves that virtually every action in modern society leaves a measurable data exhaust trail.
You look at their heavy, systemic political data sets, and they are quantifying the exact institutional mechanisms we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
They have comprehensive data, tracking the generational economic legacy of redlining in American cities. They track the millions of taxpayer dollars spent by municipalities on police misconduct settlements. They map the complex, granular intricacies of congressional redistricting and gerrymandering. They even have a data set tracking every single one of Donald Trump's lawsuits.
But what I find so brilliant is that right next to those heavy civic data sets, they apply the exact same rigorous statistical modeling to cultural touchstones.
It's fascinating.
They've used advanced data science to quantify the historical ratings of Negro League baseball players, effectively correcting decades of biased historical record-keeping. They track NFL ELO ratings. They have a data set mapping every single tattoo in the NBA. They even ran a statistical survey on how Americans prefer their steak cooked.
It perfectly illustrates that data science itself is agnostic.
Right.
The exact same mathematical principles and standard deviations used to evaluate the racial bias in a gerrymandered voting district can be used to evaluate a basketball player's shooting percentage. The math doesn't care.
It's just numbers.
But here is the critical bottleneck. Having all this perfectly cleaned open-source data is entirely useless if the general public cannot understand what it means.
Having raw data is like having a giant pile of raw timber and a box of nails dumped in your front yard. It's potential, but it's not a house.
No, you can't live in a pile of timber.
Data storytelling is the act of actually building the architecture so a reader can walk inside, look out the window, and understand the view.
And to borrow from the insights of the pudding, specifically an essay by a developer named Russell called Making Internet Things, the architecture of that house relies entirely on constraints.
Constraints.
When you are a data journalist, it is incredibly easy to get lost in the technical weeds. Russell points out that building stories for an audience forces you to ruthlessly eliminate irrelevant technical choices.
If you're on deadline, you cannot afford to spend 3 days obsessing over the exact hexadecimal color of a drop shadow on a web button, or trying to code a bespoke interactive browser map from scratch when a standard one works perfectly fine.
You just can't.
Structuring data for a reader isn't just about making it pretty, it's like adjusting the focal length on a camera lens. If you show the reader the entire massive 10,000 row spreadsheet of economic indicators, the aperture is too wide, everything is blurry, overwhelming, and they will simply click away.
They'll bounce immediately.
By using strict constraints, you are intentionally blurring out the background noise, so the exact crisis, the actual narrative, comes into sharp focus.
He cites his colleague Matt's guiding philosophy, which is just ship it.
Ship it.
You might have a grand vision of a sprawling interactive magnum opus integrating VR video and deep shoe leather reporting. But if your editor needs to show the public the geographic concentration of job losses by 5 p.m., you have to prioritize clarity over complexity. Constraints prevent the story from meandering into irrelevance.
The pudding source material gives incredible examples of how structuring information sequentially makes complex data completely digestible.
Yeah, their automation story is great.
Take their analysis of jobs lost to automation. They didn't just throw a giant interactive chart of 500 industries at the reader. They walked them down a very specific, constrained path. First, they showed the specific, relatable occupations most likely to be automated. Then, they shifted the lens to map the geographic impacts, which specific counties would lose those jobs.
Moving from the macro to the micro.
Finally, they connected those dots to explain how that specific localized economic shock could lead to swing states drifting politically to the right.
It's a masterclass in logical progression. They essentially take the reader by the hand. They also highlight Matt's famous analysis of the vocabularies of hip-hop artists.
Oh, I love that one.
Right. When you have a massive data set of tens of thousands of lyrics, you don't bury the lead in a dense academic introduction. You start the story with a massive, clear, immediate chart showing exactly who the most lexically diverse rapper is. You instantly pique the reader's curiosity, and then you explain the math behind it. You owe your audience the courtesy of clarity.
Yeah.
You cannot publish a black box analysis where you just throw a chart on the screen and essentially say, trust us, the math is right.
But I'm looking at this constraint philosophy and I see a massive risk here.
What's that?
If we are deliberately simplifying the narrative, if we are intentionally cutting out the messy tangential side data just to force the reader down a clean, highly structured path, don't we risk omitting the very nuances that might disprove the neat story we're trying to tell? If we smooth out all the rough edges just to make it a compelling story, aren't we bordering on manipulating the truth?
You are identifying the eternal tightrope walk of data journalism. Oversimplification absolutely breeds misinformation. The editorial challenge is ensuring that the constraints you apply remove only the noise, never the context.
Distill without distorting.
Exactly. You have to distill without distorting. And gathering all those initial data points to ensure you actually possess the full context is becoming exponentially harder. The internet is growing, fracturing, and becoming more heavily guarded every single day.
Which is exactly why journalists can no longer just rely on manual Google searches, FOIA requests, and scrolling through Excel spreadsheets.
The volume is just too high.
The volume of data has surpassed human processing capacity. They are turning to the heavy artillery. Open source intelligence, or OSINT, and artificial intelligence.
Let's unpack the OSINT ecosystem first, specifically looking at the Bellingcat toolkit. Bellingcat is a remarkable independent collective of researchers and citizen journalists who investigate everything from war crimes to corporate malfeasance.
They're amazing.
They've built a massive collaborative digital toolkit for open source research. And what is truly revealing here is how hyper-specialized the act of investigating has become.
It is incredibly granular. It's not just a page of handy links. They have appointed volunteer guardians who curate investigative tools for highly specific niche domains.
Right.
Looking at the source, you see the modern anatomy of an investigation. You have a guardian named Afton handling the transport category, curating tools to track the private jets of oligarchs and the transponder data of cargo ships. Anissa Shabir curates tools for image and video authentication, which is vital for detecting deepfakes or geolocating protest footage.
All very specialized.
Lyeth Carreno focuses on environment and wildlife, tracking the transnational dark money in wildlife trafficking. Laura is the guardian for companies and finance, providing tools to pierce corporate veils. And Martin Sona oversees social media tools.
This extreme level of specialization is an absolute necessity because the sheer volume and complexity of the data in any one of those domains is just too vast for any single generalist reporter to comprehend.
You can't be an expert in cargo ship transponders and shell company law at the same time.
Right. But here is the terrifying reality. Even with an army of specialized guardians and crowdsourced volunteers, the human capacity to manually scrape, read, and analyze this data is hitting a hard physical limit. There are simply too many websites, too many PDFs, and too many social media posts.
The pipe is too big.
That is why the integration of AI is the next major paradigm-shifting frontier, as detailed in the ArXiv paper on AI in investigative journalism.
That paper is a glimpse into the immediate future. It details how large language models, LLMs, the tech behind things like ChatGPT, are being actively prototyped to assist investigative reporters. The holy grail they are trying to build is what they call the universal data scraper.
Think back to that ProPublica example, where human beings had to sit there and manually clean 13,200 dirty medical records, standardizing Walmart and Walgreens.
The nightmare spreadsheet.
A functional universal data scraper would allow a journalist to use natural language, just typing in plain English, to command an AI agent to go out into the web, navigate incredibly messy, unstandardized websites, extract the relevant data, and instantly organize it into a clean, flawless table.
The paper provides a brilliant real-world example of why this is so desperately needed, looking at journalists in Germany.
Yeah, the city councils.
Participants in the study explained that tracking local city council regulations across German municipalities is an absolute nightmare. The data isn't centralized. It's scattered across hundreds of local government websites, all with different archaic layouts, weird formatting, and zero systematic accessibility.
Every town has its own broken website.
One journalist lamented that they have to manually check 18 different websites every single week just to see if a zoning law changed. They want an AI tool where they can just type, go to these 18 sites every morning, find any new regulations related to commercial real estate, and put them in a clean spreadsheet for me by 9 a.m.
Beyond just scraping boring municipal sites, they want to use these AI agents to penetrate what they call the black boxes of opaque social media platforms. They want tools that can autonomously monitor the labyrinthine networks of radical political party members or track coordinated disinformation campaigns across thousands of accounts simultaneously.
And the researchers aren't just theorizing. They actually built a prototype called Journal X Recorder.
This thing is wild.
It's essentially a highly advanced smart assistant that sits in your browser and watches you investigate. The user opens a browser, navigates to YouTube, searches for a keyword like journalism, clicks on a specific video, and highlights the title and a few comments.
So it watches your actions.
Exactly. The Journal X Recorder quietly tracks all those specific DOM interactions on the webpage. It learns exactly what the human journalist is looking for, and then it autonomously generates a script to scrape all the search results, instantly extracting the titles and comments from hundreds of videos without the human ever having to click next page.
It is literally scaling human curiosity at the speed of a processor.
Yeah.
But, and this is a massive, but the paper explicitly highlights the severe, potentially catastrophic dangers of injecting generative AI into the core of investigative journalism.
The risks.
If you outsource the gathering and parsing of truth to an algorithm, you inherit every single flaw, bias, and hallucination that algorithm possesses.
Hallucinations are the terrifying part. If an LLM is summarizing a 500-page leaked financial document, and it simply hallucinates a fact, if it confidently invents a connection between a politician and a shell company that doesn't exist, and the journalist publishes it,
It's over.
the credibility of the publication is instantly destroyed, and they are handed a multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit.
The researchers also warn heavily about biased training data, skewing the entire focus of an investigation.
How so?
Well, the AI was trained on data that inherently criminalizes poverty. Its analysis of municipal crime data will reflect that bias. Furthermore, on a purely technical level, the paper notes that if you use an LLM to generate the actual Python code for your web scraper, the AI might pull outdated code snippets from its training data.
It uses old code.
Right. It might use deprecated libraries that introduce severe cybersecurity vulnerabilities directly into the newsroom's internal network. When you are investigating oligarchs, state-sponsored hackers, or the quote-unquote Epstein class, operational security is paramount. You cannot have an AI assistant accidentally leaving the digital back door wide open to spyware.
So we find ourselves in this incredibly precarious position, right? We are fighting algorithmic opacity and hidden power structures with more algorithms.
It's algorithms all the way down.
If an AI is scraping the data, filtering the missing values, summarizing the PDFs, and generating the charts, at what point do we completely lose the human truth of the investigation? If the journalist cannot explain exactly mathematically how the machine arrived at the conclusion, how can they ethically publish it as fact?
That is the existential crisis of modern data journalism. To prevent losing that human truth, to avoid becoming entirely dependent on black box algorithms, the humans running these investigations must deeply, intimately understand the underlying mechanics of data science.
They have to know the math.
You cannot treat AI as magic. If you are going to trust a machine to drive your investigation at 1,000,000 miles an hour, you have to know exactly how the engine works and how to fix it when it misfires.
So let's pop the hood on that engine. Let's drop all the way down to the absolute bedrock of how data is actually manipulated using the CBSE Artificial Intelligence Teacher Handbook as our guide.
This is the foundation.
This is the underlying math and code that those Bellingcat tools, the 538 models, and the AI scrapers are actually built on.
If we're talking about the bedrock, we have to start with the foundational language of data science, which is Python, and specifically two absolutely critical Python libraries, NumPy and Pandas. NumPy, which stands for numerical Python, is the raw engine for high-performance numerical computing. It handles massive arrays of data.
And the handbook explains a key concept here. In NumPy, the number of dimensions an array has is called its rank.
Rank, right.
This sounds abstract, but it's just a way of visualizing data complexity. A simple flat list of numbers, like a list of ages, is a rank 1 array. A grid of numbers, like a standard spreadsheet with rows and columns, is a rank 2 array. And you can keep adding dimensions for vastly more complex datasets, like 3D spatial data.
But while NumPy is the engine, Pandas is the steering wheel. Pandas is the absolute workhorse of data journalism.
Everyone uses it.
When you hear that the ICIJ is processing millions of leaked financial records, or ProPublica is analyzing tens of thousands of health complaints, they're almost certainly using Pandas to do it.
Pandas relies on two main structural concepts. You have a series, which you can think of as a single vertical column of data, and then you have the data frame, which is a two-dimensional table.
Like a super spreadsheet.
If you've ever used Excel, a data frame is conceptually similar, but it is a vastly more powerful, infinitely programmable spreadsheet that can handle millions of rows without crashing your computer.
And the very first logistical step in any data investigation is getting the raw information into that data frame. The handbook explains how analysts use simple commands like pd.reacsv to import comma-separated values files.
Just bring you the text in.
But as we discussed with ProPublica, the moment that data is loaded, you realize it is never perfect. The real world is messy, and data sets are always riddled with holes.
In Pandas, those holes, the missing values, are represented as NaN, which stands for not a number. And how a journalist chooses to handle those NaNs is not just a technical coding decision. It is a massive editorial and ethical choice that can completely alter the outcome of the investigation.
Exactly. The handbook outlines the two primary strategies for dealing with missing data. The first is using the dropNuff function, which commands the program to simply delete any entire row that contains a missing value.
Just toss it out.
Mathematically, it cleans the data set. But ethically, it's a minefield. Imagine ProPublica is analyzing those 13,200 hospital records, and 4,000 of them are missing the specific zip code of the patient. If a journalist hastily uses dropNuff, they just instantly deleted 4,000 complaints from the public record. If those missing zip codes disproportionately belong to undocumented immigrants or marginalized communities who are afraid to provide their address, the journalist just accidentally erased the most vulnerable people from the narrative using a single line of lazy code.
You literally alter reality.
Yeah.
The alternative strategy is estimation. using the fillna function. Instead of dropping the row, you tell pandas to fill the missing nan with a specific value. You might fill it with a 0, or you might calculate the statistical average of the entire column and insert that average into the blank spaces.
Right, so moving it over.
But again, you are making a profound editorial choice. You are synthesizing data that didn't exist in reality to make the math work. Understanding the friction of missing values is what separates a truth seeker from someone just playing with numbers.
Once the data is finally cleaned and structured, we move into the realm of machine learning to actually analyze it. But this brings up the most important question of the AI era. How do we know if the machine learning model is actually right?
We have to grade it.
This is where evaluation metrics are critical. The handbook draws a fundamental distinction between two types of problems AI tries to solve: classification and regression.
Classification is exactly what it sounds like. It's when you want the AI to categorize data into specific, discrete classes. Is this email spam or not spam? Is this financial transaction fraudulent or legitimate? Is this tumor malignant or benign?
To evaluate if a classification model is accurate, data scientists use a tool called a confusion matrix.
Love that name.
It's very descriptive. It's a table that measures exactly how the AI succeeded or failed by tracking true positives, false positives, true negatives, and false negatives. And in journalism, understanding the difference between a false positive and a false negative is existential. If an AI model flags a completely innocent bank transaction as fraudulent and a journalist publishes it, that's a false positive, and it results in a devastating defamation lawsuit. They also track metrics like precision and recall to measure the exact ratio of the model's accuracy.
On the other hand, regression models are used when the answer isn't a category, but a continuous numerical value. You use regression when you want to predict the future price of a house based on its square footage, or if you want to predict the exact economic impact of a specific tax cut on a specific county.
Because the AI is predicting a fluid number, you can't just say it was right or wrong. You have to measure how far off its guess was from reality. So, you evaluate regression models using error rate metrics like mean squared error or MSE and root mean squared error or RMSE. It tells the journalist the margin of error they must disclose to the public.
The handbook also touches on computer vision, which has become incredibly vital for open source investigators verifying satellite imagery of conflict zones or geolocating protest footage.
Very important for Bellingcat.
Yeah, and it breaks computer vision down into classification, asking the AI, what is the main object in this image? And localization, asking the AI, draw a bounding box and tell me exactly where this specific tank or building is located within the frame.
But perhaps the most culturally relevant concept in the handbook, especially regarding the future of truth and misinformation, is the explanation of generative versus discriminative AI models.
This is huge.
Discriminative models are what we've mostly used up to this point. They learn the boundaries between different classes of data. They look at thousands of images and learn the patterns required to confidently say this is a dog and this is a cat. They discriminate between realities.
But generative models, the technology currently driving the explosion of deepfakes, synthetic audio, and AI-written propaganda, do something entirely different. They seek to deeply understand the underlying distribution of the training data so they can create entirely new, completely synthetic samples that look and sound real.
And the handbook explains the architecture behind this, which is GANs, or generative adversarial networks.
The mechanism of a GAN is brilliant and terrifying.
Oh, absolutely.
It's literally like an art forger and a police detective locked in a room together. The network consists of two separate neural networks fighting each other. The generator is the forger. Its only job is to constantly create fake images or text based on the training data. The discriminator is the detective. Its only job is to analyze the fakes and try to catch the microscopic flaws that prove it isn't real. Every single time the detective catches a flaw, the forger learns exactly what gave it away, and it makes a slightly better fake the next time. They fight each other over and over, millions of times at lightning speed, until the forger's synthetic output is statistically indistinguishable from reality. The detective can no longer tell the difference.
And this brings our entire journey full circle. If we connect this cutting-edge generative technology back to our very first topic, when you were confronted with wild, terrifying claims about the world being secretly run by a feudal Epstein class, you cannot simply take the narrative at face value, no matter how convincing the synthetic evidence might look.
You can't just trust a PDF.
It is these exact bedrock tools, the pandas data frames filtering millions of offshore bank leaks, The machine learning regression models tracking decades of wage stagnation, and the OSINT web scrapers monitoring political action that allows citizens and journalists to pierce the veil of both institutional secrecy and algorithmic deception to find out what is empirically true.
So, to summarize this incredibly expansive deep dive, we started in the clouds with a chilling, detailed conspiracy theory outlining a deliberate blueprint by the ultra-wealthy to dismantle democracy, strip rights from the vulnerable, structurally subjugate women, and engineer a permanent two-class society.
We then explored how society actively fights back against that kind of systemic consolidation of power through the crowdsourced global journalism of the ICIJ and the grueling manual data cleaning persistence of ProPublica.
We looked at the raw materials of truth, examining how groups like 538 open source the data of our civic life, and how the pudding utilizes strict storytelling constraints, adjusting the focal length of the narrative to make complex data understandable to the public without losing the context.
And finally, we dug into the immediate future of investigation. We saw how Bellingcat's hyper-specialized toolkits and the looming rise of AI-driven universal scrapers are supercharging what journalists can do, while simultaneously requiring them to deeply understand the bedrock Python code, pandas functions, and machine learning metrics to avoid being fooled by hallucinations or manipulated by generative adversarial networks.
It is a constant evolving arms race between the people hoarding power and the people building the tools to expose them. But I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. We have spent this entire time looking at how AI and automation are giving journalists unprecedented power to investigate the global elite.
It's an incredible power.
But as these massive language models become more autonomous, as they begin generating their own scraping code, cleaning the data themselves, and writing their own analytical narratives, will the ultimate arbiters of truth remain the human journalists wielding the tools? Or will the handful of massive tech companies that own, train, and control these black box AI models become the very Epstein class that the conspiracy theory warned us about, silently, algorithmically controlling the flow of all human information?
It all comes back to the murky waters. The X-ray machine we are currently using to diagnose the health of our society is increasingly being built, funded, and controlled by the very institutions we desperately need to investigate.
Something to keep in mind the next time you see a clean, simple chart confidently explaining the complexities of the world. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the data sets you are handed. Always look for the missing values they tried to drop, and we will see you next time.